Thank you so much. Yeah. So, good afternoon, everybody. Is it possible to put your videos on? If it is possible, please put on your videos so that I would like to see some faces when I speak. Yeah. And good afternoon. Today we'll be talking about what is termed as the dignity conserving care. I'm sure all of us would have heard about, death with dignity, living with dignity, isn't it? It's a very commonly used term throughout, even in palliative care as well as in life in general. So what I will be doing is, what does this dignity mean in the healthcare setting? And to explore how this dignity, what is the concept in the terminally ill patients that we deal with, and what is the basics of the dignity conserving care. So that's what I'll run through in the next hour or so. And please feel free to stop me and put your questions in the chat box. And Rajlakshmi, you are there, right? To help me, if any questions come in, please stop me midway and ask me about it. Okay. So also, I would like to be very interactive. So I'll post in some questions in between, which you can put it up in the chat box. Fine. Okay, here we go. So when we talk about dignity, right, we talk about it a lot generally, but in healthcare, it's about knowing the person. Okay. This is a quote by Peggy Lee, who says, I know a little bit about a lot of things. As doctors, we know a lot about biology. As a psychiatrist, I do know a lot about psychology. And sometimes we know little gems here and there of theology. But what we actually need to concentrate is knowing the patient as an individual. And only dignity conserving care is all about that. So I would just generally like to ask you, what do you understand by dignity? Each of your understanding about dignity in general. We can put it up in the chat box while I wait. Anything in the chat box? Self-respect. Esther says self-respect. Yes, thank you so much for that reply. Yeah. Any other answers about dignity?
Yeah, how I esteem myself. It's a self-esteem also.
Self-esteem.
Excellent. How I value myself.
Yes, self-esteem, self-respect. Anything else? Anybody else? To maintain self-decorum. Okay. Yeah, so we have few answers. If I can proceed further. So it depends upon how we look. Dignity is looked at with different lenses. Okay, philosophy talks. I'm sure all of you have heard about dignity, philosophical aspects of dignity. People talk about it in politics. There is law that talks about dignity. In ethics, we talk about dignity, isn't it? That understanding or definition of dignity varies depending upon in which lens we are looking at it. Primarily in the healthcare, we are looking at a state of being worthy, honored, or esteemed. Okay, ability to live in accordance with one's standards and values. Also, it is about how people feel when they are being cared for, how we healthcare workers make the patients feel. Basically, the underlying aspect is that it is very complex and there are multiple definitions of dignity. Three of you told three different things, right? One said self-decorum, one said self-respect, the other said self-esteem. Okay, so there are various ways in each of us looks at dignity from a different perspective. So that is something that we need to keep in mind. Generally, what the literature says is that the dignity is of two types. One is the philosophical aspect of dignity, what we call the basic dignity. All human beings have an intrinsic worth, right? This is innate. Nothing can take it away, nor nothing can, increase your dignity or reduce it. It's universal. You cannot measure it. It is not related to any context, and it is just the basic human worth. Okay, this is what we talk about in philosophy, the basic dignity. But there is another aspect of dignity, which is called as the personal dignity. The personal dignity is the self-respect, self-esteem, the self-decorum, how we conduct ourselves in the social circumstances, how the society treats you, how much you are in control of what is happening around you, how your family members treat you. Okay, these are aspects: autonomy, social dignity, dignity of self, like self-respect, self-esteem, dignity in relation, how you are being treated by others. Okay, these are aspects of personal dignity. These are very individualistic. Okay, it depends, varies from person to person. This is something that we can measure, and this is related to our personal goal and social circumstances. And this personal dignity is what gets affected when you have a terminal illness. So the basic intrinsic worth is not affected, but the personal dignity of how we look at ourselves and how the world treats us gets affected when you have a chronic illness. So this is what we will be learning more about in this session. So when we talk about a terminally ill patient, let us see in what all ways is the dignity of this individual affected. So I want us to listen to the Amit's story. He's 70 years old, and he's a very respected school principal. He's a very disciplined man. He's got a set routine. He gets up in the morning every day, goes for a walk, then comes back, and a staunch believer in God, prays, has a ritualistic prayer pattern every day. He's a widower and living alone, doesn't want to be dependent on anybody. He volunteers. After all this, he goes to his school to volunteer and takes extra classes for the children who are not performing well, wants to contribute back to the society in some way. He has 2 children, Arun and Anita. Anita is living abroad, married and living abroad. Arun lives in the neighboring town, but visits him every weekend. He has recently been diagnosed with metastatic CA lung, and he has continuous cough. So the Arun takes him to visit the doctor. So this is an individual who has been functioning very well, has a terminal illness, has symptoms because of it, and is going to have an interaction with the healthcare system. So let us see how our system treats him actually. He is coughing outside the waiting room. Okay. And the reactions of other patients. What happens today when you cough with COVID? Right? With COVID there, when you start coughing, how do people around you treat you? There's a lot of stigma attached to even a small cough, isn't it? So the reactions of the other patients are making him very conscious about his cough. In the examination room, a young lady intern comes and asks him to remove the shirt. When he removes his shirt and she's just about to examine him, her friends come in and they are talking about the upcoming exam. People are coming and going out of the room. This very disciplined gentleman is sitting there with his shirt open, and the small talk is going on around him. Suddenly he coughs and the doctor yells, "Please cover your mouth." Okay. And then he goes to meet the senior doctor, and the intern tells, "Sir, this is a case of metastatic CA lung," without mentioning his name. After examination, the doctor gives him some medicine and he's sent out of the room, where the doctor discusses about all this with the son. And when the son comes out, Mr. Amit asks his son, Arun, "What did the doctor say?" He said nothing, everything will be all right. You just take the medications. And they go back home. Arun has a discussion with his sister. The doctor has told him the cancer has progressed. He's going to be more sick. So they decide it is not practical for him to be living in the home alone. So the children decide that Amit has to move in with Arun. Now Amit is upset. He feels lost. He feels that he's going to burden everyone. How do you think Amit is feeling at this point in time? And what are all his concerns? Can you just put it up in the chat box? First of all, is it a common scenario that happens in hospitals? Anybody wants to?
Yeah. Namaste, Madam Dr. Seema. This is Mudra from Mysore.
Yes.
First of all, the patient is a very senior person, 70 years
Mhm.
of age, and he has spent his life as a teacher.
Mm.
And obviously, he has been explaining things to kids.
Mm.
And things, when it's not being explained to him, he feels very, very awkward about that.
Yes.
Very fact that his son is dictating certain things, take medicine, you'll be okay. Without any explanation, he feels very, very deprived of his right to get the explanation. And naming, that's
मैं थोड़ा
looking at
चालू
this is a
करती
case
हूँ
of
मेरे को नहीं तो दोनों तरफ से
Sorry, sir. Please continue, sir.
Yeah.
Can
Please
I?
continue, sir.
Okay.
It was somebody who had unmuted, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the commands given to a patient
Mm.
from a medical professional or a paramedical professional
Mm.
is that the service provider is on a different pedestal, at a different level. Under the impression that he is giving something, this man has to take it. That is there is a lot of distance between the service provider and the service receiver.
Okay.
So obviously, this creates a lot of inferiority in the mind of the patient.
Excellent. Okay. Okay. Okay.
So
Thank you.
when he says this is a case of cancer, lung cancer, that means he is not being treated as a human entity. He is being treated as some body. He's not being treated as Mr. Amit. He's being treated as somebody.
Yeah.
So these are the things which really affects the sense of dignity in a person.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for your contribution, sir. We have quite a few messages on the chat. Some of Sunita agrees that yes, ma'am, most of the times people are treated like this. Mohan Kumar also says the same. Gayatri also agrees on it. And Satish Kalra says it's disgusting behavior, waiting, removing shirt, yelling, referring. That is ignoring the autonomy of the patient. Yes, it is. And he must be feeling that he is losing control of his life. Again, yes, Shrikala, it is about autonomy and the right of making decisions. It's all about autonomy, isn't it? Being treated with respect and all that. And without his permission, making him move to his son's zone. Yeah, suddenly he feels out of control. A person who has had so much of control over his life, suddenly everything is taken away. One disease comes in and loses everything. So we should know. Okay, we should all know what are the things that in a terminally ill patients, what all has an impact on the dignity. So the next, this thing is when we look at a chronic illness, right? What happens, as you said, from Amit, he becomes a case of metastatic CA lung, isn't it? So, sorry. So the chronic illness opens the doorway to patienthood. From that point on, whatever interactions he has with the healthcare system or with the family, he is always treated as a patient rather than as a person. So this impacts the individuality of the person. So there is there are two things that are very prominent when we talk about the factors mediated by the illness. One is the distress caused by the symptoms. The cough is disturbing me too much. He is not able to teach, is not able to talk to anybody because of the cough. And he feels, what will that cause? That will in turn cause psychological distress because he is no longer able to function normally. Also the fear, will my disease be cured? So that uncertainty is always there, isn't it? Whenever patients are in palliative care, when they are terminally ill, will this be cured? Will I be able to manage this? Am I going to die? So the distress, all these will cause some amount of distress. Then the level of independence is compromised. isn't it? They may not be able to do activities of daily living. This will impact the individual quite a bit. Also, sometimes cognitively, some of the chronic illnesses will impact the ability to think. A person who was very sharp and functioning will slowly may not be able to do so in the same manner, especially after a neurological stroke or dementia, etc., loses the cognitive capacity. So whenever a patient is chronically ill, the symptoms cause an impact and dignity on the dignity of the person as well as the level of independence. So it is extremely important that we look at these concerns. Is there a physical distress? Use enough medication to ensure the symptoms are under control. Is there psychological distress? Give support, psychological support, empathetic listening, and also counseling to ensure that the psychological distress is addressed. Is there medical uncertainty? Provide information. Is there death anxiety? Help them to cope through psychological support the anxiety causes. Is there cognitive acuity affected? Then treat. Whenever there is something that is reversible, treat it. If not, you help them deal with it. Is the functional capacity affected? Then as far as possible, help to maintain mobility of the individual. So these are some of the techniques that you can use to maintain dignity. That is help the person maintain dignity as far as the illness is concerned. Now, the second aspect I told you is factors that is dependent on the individual. So one is the illness has caused an impact on the dignity. Second, how does the individual deal with this illness? That also has an impact on the person's dignity. There are two ways an individual, there is the psycho-spiritual landscape, isn't it? Each of us has our own coping mechanisms. Each of us has our own spiritual beliefs. And every individual uses this to deal with the impact of the illness. So there are two aspects here. One is called as the dignity conserving repertoire. This explains or looks at how each individual perceives the situation that they are in. The second is how do they deal with this situation? We have to look at this closely to understand how it impacts the individual's dignity. For example, one of the primary concerns people who are nearing end of life have is, how is the world going to remember me? Am I worth something? Did I leave my mark on this world? Okay, how are they going to remember me? And sometimes they feel because of the illness, I've become a burden on others. My whole respect is gone. Previously, I was a functioning principal of a school. People used to respect me. Wherever I used to go, people would stand up, and give me the respect that I deserved. Now, when I go to the hospital, what happens? Right? I'm asked to wait with my shirt open. People come in and go, right? That respect is no longer given to me, right? So that is, now, how do I find the strength to go on in this? Okay, I'm no longer the person that I used to be. I can no longer continue with my job. I can no longer do the things that I used to do regularly, right? My continuity with my life is gone, right? I'm not able to pray like before. I'm not able to go out for a walk. And there is nothing, sometimes they may become upset that there is nothing left in my life, or that my life is not under control. So these are all things that, very commonly run through a person's mind when they are affected with the chronic illness that is making them very sick. So one of the things we need to do is role preservation. First one is continuity of self, right? Is the person able to pray like he was praying before? Amit used to pray for 1 hour every day, go for a walk. He used to make all his decisions himself, isn't it? Are we taking that away from him? So we have to look at that and see, as far as possible, maintain that continuity to the self that the individual experiences. He is a teacher, isn't it? So maybe preservation of role is extremely important. If he is not able to give a continuous lecture or able to teach continuously, maybe for a short, reducing the time that he is teaching, may help in sustaining the role. For example, a housewife whose whole role has been as a wife and a mother and is used to cook for the whole family, because of an illness is no longer able to cook. So how can we ensure that she preserves her role? You could tell her that she could sit and chop vegetables and give and instruct whoever is cooking on how to cook. So be productive in some manner. Maintenance of pride, maintaining hope. And when we look at hope, we have to focus on realistic hope. What is still possible with all the disease and disability? What is still possible? Make this person have some sense of control over their life. Probably involving the person in decision making, telling them about the truth about the illness that they have. All this will help in maintaining dignity. Also, what is this that I'm leaving behind for the once I'm gone? How is my family going to remember me? The generativity and legacy, as we call. Okay, so this is something that we will be talking about when we talk about dignity therapy next in the next session. But helping people create documents or leave memories behind for the family is also an important part of maintaining dignity. Also, when we help them to accept and live with the terminal illness, that is a major way in which we can enhance dignity. Is it clear so far? Any questions? Any questions from anyone? Shall I go ahead?
No, I'm just only trying to reinforce what I've been telling, that this exercise of making the will is also an exercise to maintain the dignity, when you look at that from that sense.
Yes,
So
the generativity and legacy. Yes,
yeah.
Yes. It is also, when you make a will, it is also about what we call as autonomy, which I will be speaking later. Okay, the aftermath and autonomy concerns, I'll be coming to that. So these are all ways wherein we can help person maintain their dignity. The other thing is about dignity conserving practice. I said this is what the person thinks, but what does the person do? That comes in the dignity conserving practices. When a patient's nearing end of life, when they are suffering or going through a terminal illness, some of the practices that helps the person deal with it in a proper manner is, one is about living in the moment. Okay, because tomorrow we don't know what complications are going to arise, isn't it? Patient may have severe pain tomorrow and not be able to do any of the activities. So generally living in the moment, simple pleasures, looking at today, living today as best as you can live. Okay, planning for the day. Today the pain is not there, I'm feeling better, let me do something productive. When you plan for tomorrow, the scene might be different, especially in terminally ill patients, right? Tomorrow they might have breakthrough pains, they might have some other infection, and things might turn for the worse. So helping patients to live in the moment and plan for today, not worrying too much about what is going to happen ahead, is one way. The second way is maintaining normalcy. Most of the time, what is stolen away from these individuals are the sense of normalcy. Everything, even the family members are all involved in caring for the patient. Okay, involved in doing for the patient, maybe looking after the wound, maybe feeding the patient, maybe giving them medicine on time, right? Everybody is involved in and talking. The talk is constantly about the disease, what is going to happen, about the symptoms. When a patient, as I said, when they enter into that patienthood, all talk is about the illness. Okay, so they are taken away from the normalcy. Even in our hospice, when patients move into the hospice or the hospital environment takes away the sense of normalcy, isn't it? So as far as possible, help the patient maintain normalcy. When you talk to the person or the patient, talk about normal things before you move on to the disease. So these are ways where we can keep them help them maintain normalcy. And also the spiritual comfort. Providing spiritual comfort is one of the practices where we help patients connect with themselves, connect in a normal way with those around, with the family members, help them find meaning in the suffering. Okay, these are practices that will keep their dignity intact. So helping patients live in the moment, maintain normalcy, and provide them with spiritual comfort will help them maintain some sense of dignity in their suffering. So there are various therapies that are available for spiritual comfort. There are, which we will talk about later. And I'm sure you would have had a session on spiritual well-being for patients, so that you can look at. And maintaining normalcy is allowing the patients to exercise, light exercise, whatever is possible, keep them as mobile as possible, talk to them about family matters, involve them in the family decision makings. All this helps maintain a sense of normalcy for the patient. The third factor is how these patients are treated by the family members as well as by the healthcare system. These go a long way in mediating dignity of the individual. And this is where I'm going to concentrate. The first one is, as we saw in Amit, the fear of being a burden on the family. The second is, these people require more support from friends. Social support and social acceptance is extremely important. The third aspect is the fear of what is going to happen to my family after I am gone. This is termed as an aftermath concern. It is important to ensure that the privacy of the patient is respected. And most importantly, one of the most important thing for the patient is being treated with respect, kindness, and compassion by the healthcare provider, which is called as the care tenor. Among all the dignity concerns, it is this care tenor that is extremely important for the patients. It is how the care providers, whether it is the family members or whether it is the healthcare providers, treat the patient. That is what has the maximum impact on a patient's dignity, which puts more responsibility on us, isn't it? So when we look at it, privacy boundary, it is important to understand that when a patient enters into a hospital, this privacy boundaries are lost. I'll tell you my experience. I was rounding in KMC Manipal. There was this 17-year-old girl who had an osteosarcoma, metastatic osteosarcoma. She was very sick, breathless, and I just wanted to auscultate her. She was wearing a hospital gown. Okay, and the ward was full of patients, patient attenders were there. As we made the patient sit, right, the whole gown fell away, exposing her back completely up to the gluteal region. Okay, so what would a normal parent do in this circumstance? They have the daughter who was made to sit. They made the daughter sit. The parents made her sit in front of the doctor, and the whole gown fell open. So what would, if this had happened outside the hospital setup, what would the parents have done? No replies?
They would
would like to protect the child
immediately.
There'll
be some effort to cover her body.
Cover her body, isn't it? But in the hospital setup, does it happen? Right? Why? Even the parents have started looking at the daughter like a patient, isn't it? Not like their daughter, right? The way the person is, she's gotten dehumanized to such an extent, right? Objectified to such an extent that does not look odd, isn't it, at that point? So this is how, even when we have seen, we examine the abdomen of a female patient, we have so many doctors surrounding, nurses are there, right? Do we pull up a screen every time we examine a patient? We don't, isn't it? So there is constant intrusion of the privacy boundaries of the patient that happens in the hospital, and we all get used to it. Patients also get used to it. But this is one of the places where the dignity is stripped off completely from the person. Social support is also extremely important. To ensure that there is enough patient feel supported, visitation hours have to be reduced, especially for terminally ill patients. and we have to address their concerns of being a burden on others, and the aftermath concerns, like, like you said, what will happen to the family after I die. So probably those are the things, like making a will, settling financial issues. These are things that we can help. And most importantly, it is our care tenor. Okay, we need to treat the patient as they are worthy of respect, honor, and esteem. As Dr. Mudre rightly said, there is a huge gap between the doctor, the care provider, and the patient, the care receiver. There is some sort of I am above and they are below, sort of a power imbalance that comes in. We have to sort of reduce that power imbalance and provide care on equal terms. And that is what dignity conserving care is all about. So how do we know that some of our patient concerns are addressed? How do we ensure that these concerns are affected? There is something called as the patient dignity inventory. This inventory has about 25 items that we spoke about previously, some relating to the illness, some relating to the individual, and some relating to the social circumstance that they are in. So asking them questions and telling them which of the items are impacted in this individual will give you an idea what to address. Remember, all patients will not have dignity concerns. All dignity concerns. Some may be concerned about the privacy, some may be concerned about aftermath concerns, some may have physical symptoms where the dignity is affected. Like if they are vomiting continuously in front of others, they might feel that their dignity is affected. So different people will have different concerns. So this can be used to identify their concerns, and then we can use to address their specific concerns. Any questions so far? Please feel free to ask any questions if you have. No questions? Okay, I'll move on to the next. So how can we foster dignity in the terminally ill? How can we do it? Are there any techniques that you use in your setup to do it? Anybody would like to share?
Probably what immediately comes to my mind is about the mobility of the patient. If the patient has been very active earlier, and he is feeling bad about that particularly, but he is not able to move around. If something can be done to facilitate his movement, maybe it could be a wheelchair or to help him walk, even walk outside few steps outside the house. So that will be helping him to maintain his dignity.
Yeah.
He can go out and talk to people. These are the things which will be helping them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that reply. Anybody else? I can see Shrikala Nair, Shanti, Hema on the screen. I'm randomly calling out names now. Anybody wants to say anything? You can put it up on the chat also. What would you do? Now what are the general dignity concern? Is there any one concern that you would like to address in your practice?
There is one, it could be a little bit jovial also. I have seen one elderly person who was bedridden, but he was a very disciplined person, as Mr. Amit is. Always clean shaven. When he was on the bed, he was not able to shave his face, and he was feeling very uncomfortable. And when somebody comes to meet him, he would be immediately looking at his scratching his beard. It is a sense that he is not presentable. So when that was helped, he was provided with a shaving set and a mirror. He was able to do it on his own. He was comfortable with that.
Yes. Absolutely. These are the small things, attention to detail that about that individual, right? What I said, I know about medicine, I know about psychology, I know about theology, but I don't know enough about you. These are things about that individual you need to learn to ensure that you are caring for that person in a dignified manner. Absolutely. These are small things that you need to notice in the individual so that the individual feels acknowledged and validated about their existence. You have not realized it telling what will happen if you have a beard. There are so many people with beard also, isn't it? But for that person, clean shaven meant continuity with himself, right? Absolutely. You have brought a very relevant point. Thank you so much for it. Anybody else? There's some things coming up on the chat. Respecting their privacy, absolutely. Let them have an active participation in the treatment and discussions. Yes, Shrikala Naik, that's absolutely right. Giving them a sense of autonomy and power to make their own decision is another important way that we can, empower them and sort of foster their dignity. Anybody else with any suggestions? You can put it in the chat. I will read it a little later. So there are two techniques that we use. See, dignity conserving care is what we are already doing. Each of us in our own way are doing some amount of what, like Sir said, Mudre Sir said about, allowing him to shave, isn't it? That was also an important aspect of fostering dignity, empowering them to make their decisions. We are all doing it in bits, in ways subconsciously. What dignity conserving care is about a mindful way, being very aware of what all can affect a person's dignity and using specific techniques in a very structured manner to address these aspects. That is what dignity conserving care is about. It's a culture of care for all healthcare professionals, irrespective of being a doctor, nurse, ward boy, Aya, or whether even it is a security staff. Dignity conserving care should be the first thing that is taught. Okay, it's about learning to respect the person as an individual, not just like a patient. All of us use the term this patient, that patient, right? We have to understand that each of them is an individual and we learn to respect them. This has to be, all healthcare providers have to be trained in this. And specifically for us in palliative care, the question that we need to answer is, what do I need to know about you as a person to give you the best care possible? That should be our mantra. We know enough about the disease. We can manage the disease. We can manage the symptoms of the disease. But until and unless we know what is that person with the disease going through, right, our care will not be complete. Okay. So the dignity conserving care should come as easy as breathing to us. We should be mindful of the concerns of our patient and take care of it. And the framework that we use, like we use for in the emergency medicine, right, airway, breathing and circulation, that is called ABCD. Okay. One is our attitude. We should be mindful of our behavior. We should be compassionate and we should have good communication skills. So these are 4 things that we need to keep in mind when we are with the patient. Dignity therapy is a more a specialized approach, which we will talk in the next session. So I'm not going into that. Okay. So what is attitude? What is attitude? Anybody would like to write what an attitude is?
Attitude determines what we see.
What we see. Excellent. Anybody else want to go give a shot?
It's also true how we see things.
It's about how we see things. Yeah.
A person's outlook towards other things.
Person's outlook. Yeah. So some of the attitudes that I have come across when I see patients in palliative care is, this patient is anyway going to die. What is the point of doing anything? Yes or no? Yeah. This caregiver is very difficult, always complaining about something or the other, right? This is the statements that we doctors make, isn't it? She is fine, but complains of pain only when she sees the doctor. The wife should forgive the patient and be with them who is so sick, right? These are attitudes and assumptions that we carry. So when we define attitude, it is the way we look at things, consistent in a manner, but it actually may not be the truth, how things really are. Like, it's about what we see and how we see it, right? And what influences what we see and how we see it is our attitude. It is the learned predisposition that we have. A simple example I'll give you. You have a patient who's a chronic alcoholic, always complaining, drunk, coming to you and complaining about things. Okay, he's also a diabetic. You're treating him for diabetes. Okay, one day he comes to you drowsy, mumbling, irrelevant talk, mumbling something. What would you think at a point? First, what would you think? What is wrong with him? Anybody? Did you get my question? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Huh?
Please come again with the question once again.
Okay, so you have a patient who is a diabetic as well as a chronic alcoholic. Okay, so he's mostly comes to your clinic drunk, right? One day he comes to you, he is drowsy, his wife tells he is drowsy and he is talking irrelevantly. What would be your first impression that comes to your mind about this patient?
आज भी पी के आ गया.
Huh? आज भी
Even
पी के आ गया, right? Right? Exactly, isn't it? So, but it could also be diabetic ketoacidosis, no? Right? But first, our assumptions or our attitude will influence what we see, isn't it? Right? So this is something that is he drunk today? Yes. Right? So that is something, that is how attitude actually influences what you see. Okay. And attitude of an expert can be very contagious and limiting, because when we decide what we see, for example, I've seen a lot of patients with mental health issues who are either schizophrenic or bipolar mood disorder. I'm a psychiatrist, right? Even when they present with a stroke or when there is a neurological signs, people first refer to psychiatry, telling, you know, it is often missed in psychiatric patients. Medical illnesses are often missed because the first thing is whatever happens is because of psychiatric issues, right? So we have certain predetermined thoughts in our mind, and that influences what we see. So whenever we see a patient who's terminally ill, first we have to examine our attitude. Okay, I try to understand how would I feel in this patient's situation. What I'm thinking, is it correct or not? Okay, is my attitude influencing how I react to the patient in any manner? Okay, is my own attitude, my fears, my anxiety, and my experience with patient influencing the way I am interacting with this particular patient? So sometimes it is very important, especially when you have a very difficult case or when you find that you're not able to, you know, to go back and examine your attitude. This part of reflection, if you make it a part of your clinical care, it helps you to develop a non-judgmental, unconditional acceptance of most of our patients, and this enhances our care, and patients feel respected when we have the right attitude when we examine them. And also we have to, how do we do it? We make this as part of our reflection. So in palliative care, in every team meeting, we sometimes have case reflections It is not case studies, where case reflections we have, where we examine our attitude, how our attitudes have influenced the way we are caring for the patients. And we have a lot of this professional development activities that we include that looks at attitudes and helps us to improve our attitude. Main thing that we have to carry is we should be non-judgmental. We should be genuinely concerned about the welfare of our patient, and we have to have unconditional acceptance. Never mind if the patient is dying, never mind if the patient is drunk, never mind if the patient is mentally ill. We should do everything possible to ensure that patient is comfortable. Okay, so keeping aside our attitude, we should be very non-judgmental in our interactions. One is always our attitude will influence our behavior with our patient. Okay, so if we have an attitude of respect towards our patient, we will look at them as individuals, not as bodies or as cases that has to be prodded and poked, isn't it? Even when you are taking an IV line, explaining the procedure to the patient, right? Telling them that it is going to hurt when I put it, but I need to do it. I'm extremely sorry, but I need to do it. Explaining that and then doing the procedure. Okay, and will help them, will make them feel valued when you do that. So that is something that we need to do. Sometimes small things like, helping patient down from the table when they are struggling to get out of the table, giving them the glass of water, or acknowledging the photograph that they have kept beside them and talking about it. All this gives them the value, the feeling that they have been valued. So one is our attitude, two is the behavior that we should focus on. See, every contact with the patient is an important clinical intervention. Even when we simply talk to them also, our communication, we have to be compassionate in our communication. We should ask patient permission before we do a clinical examination, explain to them what we are going to do, and sort of, ensure that we treat them with respect and kindness at all points in time, even as they are dying. Once we do that, that is sort of we enhance the dignity of the patient as well as the family. The third aspect of ABC is compassion. So I want you to tell me, what is pity, what is sympathy, what is empathy, and compassion? I'm sure we have heard about all this, isn't it? What is it, the same or is it different? And if it is different, what do you think it is? Anybody want to try? What is empathy? Easy. We've done palliative care. How many classes are over now?
24.
Yeah. So empathy and compassion should be at the fingertips. We leave sympathy and pity aside. So
empathy is basically if you put yourself in the patient's place, then you empathize with the patient.
Empathize with the patient. Compassion.
I'll let somebody else answer that question.
Thank you, Hema. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. Anybody wants to take that on compassion?
Probably the compassion is the next level of empathy,
Yes.
where it allows us to do certain things which can be beneficial for the person.
So empathy,
which allows us to think.
Yes.
To do what is best for the person.
Yeah, and allows you to think and do. So
yes.
Empathy plus action is compassion.
Is compassion.
Yeah. Okay. So fair enough. So I'm not going to trouble you with the pity and sympathy, but what you have to understand is there are two things. Okay. There is understanding of a patient's situation and the connection that you have with the patient. Okay. So there are two things. In pity, the understanding is there, but the connection is not there. You are acknowledging someone's feeling. One is worse off than you and feeling sorry for them. Okay, oh no, it's such a shame that it happened. But you are not very much connected to the individual. Okay, so that is pity. When you talk about sympathy, you are acknowledging someone's suffering or hardships and you feel a little for that person. Okay, but you are not feeling as though you are in their shoes. Okay, I'm sorry and sad that you are experiencing this, but you are not actually feeling what the other person is feeling or understanding to that extent. Okay, so pity and sympathy are good to have. Pity is condescending. Okay, when you pity somebody, it's sort of very condescending and not a very good emotion to have. Sympathy is very passive, right? You are understanding what the other person is going through, but you do not have the connection or the need to help them in any way. You're just sympathizing with them. Empathy is when you have put yourself in the other person's shoes, you're feeling very connected with that other person, and you know and you understand what that, and you can imagine exactly what the other person is going through. That is empathy. And compassion is you are taking an action to ease the suffering of the other. You are understanding their suffering, you feel what they're going through, and you are taking an action to reduce their suffering. So understanding and connection is high at when you are compassionate, right? Okay, now is compassion inborn or can you learn to be compassionate?
I believe empathy is inborn, and we
Okay.
need to learn to act upon empathy. That's compassion.
Okay, inborn. Okay, Sunita says inborn. Anybody else? Yeah, some people generally are more empathetic and more compassionate. Okay, for others, we can develop empathy and compassion. How? Help every individual get in touch with your, somebody needs to mute themselves. Yeah. So help everybody to get in touch with their own feelings. You know, we can build empathy, we can build compassion by discussing the narrative techniques, what we say, narrative story writing, narrative paintings, talking, the TED talks that we hear from people who are suffering, isn't it? What does it help us to do? Help us to understand what the other person is going through, isn't it? Though talks about disability, talks about how they have grown through crisis, all that, isn't it? Personal stories about illnesses, reading stories and novels about people suffering. All this helps us to understand another point of view, what the people are going through, and helps us to develop feelings of compassion. Okay. And the fourth most important aspect of care is the dialogue. Dialogue is communication, isn't it? What you have with the patient. So I'm sure you've had communication skills, right? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Huh?
Yes, ma'am.
You have had, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the communication skills, I'm sure they've taught you how to converse in a compassionate manner, isn't it? Good communication is essentially compassionate communication, where you listen to the people, you acknowledge them, validate them, and, you know, break bad news or denial or handle collusion in a very empathetic manner. So it is a critical element, and exchange of information, it is what looks at. How do you acknowledge personhood in communication? Anybody wants to go on that? I said we have to, there is patienthood and personhood, isn't it? Patienthood is when we start treating them as patients. Personhood is about treating them as persons. So how do we acknowledge this personhood?
Basically, addressing him by his name.
Excellent. Addressing.
And respecting his likes and dislikes.
Yes. Expressing likes and dislikes. Another one of the ways that we can do is learning the names of the family members, right? And talking to the patient. Instead of your son, you can say, Arun told me this, Anita told me this, right? So you are acknowledging the personhood of the family and of the patient by calling, using names, okay? And talking about their values, their preferences, right? Trying to elicit their concerns. All this you can acknowledge personhood. How do you communicate compassionately? Any idea?
Or maybe a gentle touch or An understanding look.
Yes. Touch, silence, understanding, non-verbal, right? Anything else? There is something called as a nurse technique, NURSC, which is the acronym for, what we say, naming the emotion, understanding the emotion, respecting the emotion, supporting the emotion, and exploring how we can help them. I can see that you are very anxious. Okay. Most people in your situation would also feel very anxious. Can we do something about your anxiety? Is there any way that I can help you reduce that anxiety in any way? So I'm, naming that's what we call as a nurse technique. Sometimes using these techniques in communication, what we know, will help improve the dialogue that happens between the patient and the care provider. The fourth thing is there are certain psychotherapeutic techniques like dignity therapy, meaning-centered therapy, life review, etc., which are a form of compassionate conversations that happen between the care provider and the care receiver, which sort of helps in enhancing the dignity of that individual. Okay, so dignity therapy, it's a more specialized form. But what I generally talk about is why are we talking about dignity in the end of life care so much? So one of the things is preservation of dignity. When we talk about palliation, what are we trying to do? We are trying to alleviate the suffering and provide a care, right, for the patient that is in concordance with the values and preferences of the patient and the family, isn't it? That is what we try to do. So this is a goal of palliation. So it is important for every palliative care provider to understand the concept of dignity in the terminally ill patients and understand what all factors can impact the sense of dignity and how we can enhance or foster dignity when the patient is suffering so much. Now, fractured sense of dignity, studies have shown that the fractured sense of dignity increases the desire for death. People want to die, there is a loss of will to live. There is depression, anxiety, and hopelessness. Also, there is a decreased quality of life. So, some patients will say that I'm suffering so much, I'm better off dead rather than living, isn't it? One of the primary reasons is fractured sense of dignity. So this was a study that was done in Oregon from 1998 to 2019. In 1998, they passed the Death with Dignity Act, where patients could ask for euthanasia or physician-assisted dying was legalized. Okay, so they studied those participants who had asked for death with dignity. So this purple thing is those physicians who had, those patients who had asked for physician-assisted dying. Okay, out of the 188 people who died using medication under the Death with Dignity Act, most of them were in hospice, some died at home, and they had cancer. They asked them, why is it that they want to die? So one of the things they said is loss of autonomy, not being able to have a control on life. 87% of them said that. Then decreased ability to participate in enjoyable activities like before. 90% said that. And loss of dignity, generally they said in 72% said that. So majority of these individuals wanted to die because there was a rupture in their sense of dignity that had been affected. That is one of the primary reasons why people wish to die. So which makes it extremely important that all palliative care providers are trained in at least dignity conserving care. And how do we ensure that patients don't experience this erosion of their dignity? We have to look at all those things that we have spoken about. These are the building blocks, right? Getting the symptoms under control, ensuring that they remain as functional as possible, looking that their role is preserved, Their continuity of self is there. Their sense of pride remains intact. We address their aftermath concerns. We address their we ensure they have enough privacy, give them the capacity or empower them to make their own decisions, look at their independence. And most important of all this is our tenor, the way we care for them, the way we treat them. We healthcare providers treat them. Because patients, if we value our patients, they start valuing themselves. When we sort of validate and talk to them in the right with respectfully, the families also do the same. And that percolates down to the patient's sense of dignity also. So it's extremely important that we focus on A, B, C, D. We look at our attitudes and improve our attitude, our behavior, develop compassion, and communicate in a compassionate manner with our patient. The two books that I would like everybody to have a read is The Diving Bell and the Butterfly and Dignity Therapy. Dignity Therapy is by Harvey Max Chochinov, who's the one who has developed the concept of dignity conserving care and dignity therapy in the terminally ill. And this Diving Bell and the Butterfly is a beautiful book written by Jean-Dominique Bauby. He was the editor of the Elle fashion magazine in Paris. Okay, at the age of around 40, I think, he had a stroke. And post-stroke, he was in a locked-in state where he retained movement of only one eye. He would communicate by blinking that eye. And while all the doctors and the nurses thought that he was unconscious and in a coma, it was the speech therapist or the OT, occupational therapist, happened to note that he was able to blink one eye. And she started communicating with him in that manner. And and this is about the book that he has written in a locked-in state by communicating through the blink of his eye. They developed a method of communicating, and he wrote this book, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. He talks about diving bell, that is his body, which is in a locked-in state. And the butterfly is the mind that sort of is able to explore and talk way beyond what the body is able to see or perceive. So even in that intense suffering, this individual was able to find some meaning in his life. And ironically, 2 days, or I don't remember, 2 or 10 days after the publication of this book, right? And he passed away. So goes to prove that while everybody had looked at him as a comatose patient, this one lady was able to give him the dignity that he deserved. I think it's a lesson that each of us at every point in life have to look at our patients with the eye of how we can give them the most deserving care that they deserve actually. And focusing on these minute details is extremely important. So to conclude, I would just say that when a man is singing and cannot lift his voice, another comes and sings with him. One who can lift his voice, that is we care providers, isn't it? Then the first one will be able to lift his voice too, to sing along. So that is the bond between the spirit and spirit. So we are healthcare providers, and it is up to us to find the song of each person and help them sing that song. We don't sing it for them, but we help them sing the song themselves, and we are just helpers to be there with them. So this is what dignity conserving care is all about. Thank you. These are the references. I'll be sending it to you. Those who are interested can read it. Open to questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm open to questions if anybody has any questions or anything to share. Can we put on the videos now?
Dr. Seema, thank you so much. It was a wonderful session, really. I had not heard of earlier. There's a very vast things to be learned. We are now very young in palliative care. Though I am old at 66 years, I'm hardly 6 years of experience in palliative care as a volunteer. Now, the point you were telling that the actively we need to get involved in providing dignity. I remind of one particular case where a lady was in the final stages of her cancer, and she had one desire that her son should get married. So at that point of time, as caregivers in the palliative care center, they were feeling that whether this can happen. So we were trying to understand. Now she wants to have that particular reason to be alive. Can we sustain that reason? Is it ever possible to hold on to that reason and see that things start moving? So we then told the boy and the girl to get married. So we told, try to provide some activities for her to participate in this process. Maybe you are going to fix a date, and you may start buying things, and you let her participate in those discussions. And that really went on. But unfortunately, she did not survive to see the marriage, but she was able to participate in the process of marriage. So we felt really happy about it, that she was able to travel to that extent in making certain preparations. She was a part of the team in making the marriage successful. That's what I just want to share with you.
Yeah. So I would go one step further. I'm just suggesting it's about memory making. Okay. So here, recording some video messages to the newlywed couple when she is no longer there, to be played at the time of their wedding. Yeah. Those are some of things that we can incorporate.
Yes.
I'm just going once.
Yeah.
That's what
very novel
you
idea.
cannot be there, but your messages can be there.
Yes.
Yeah. So the memory making is also a major part of that dignity conserving, that aftermath concerns that we say, isn't it? So what happens is when the wedding really happens, while they will miss their mother, that message will be there with them. Right? Audio, video messages. So here in the hospice, what we do is sometimes young mothers are passing away, and they're worried about 10th standard when their children are, what will happen to them and all. We encourage them to write letters to the children at different ages when they reach, and help them complete that communication task. So that provides the mothers with some meaning, even in the time of death. Right? Even when they are in the hospice, recording those messages or writing those letters for the children gives them some meaning and purpose in their life, in that last stages of your life when they are not able to move out of the bed. Okay, this memory making is a huge task. When they are able to do it, encourage them to do it.
Probably a very similar case it happened, but there was one case which was referred, one lady by name Harini. I should not be making that mistake of referring a case. Her name is Harini. She was referred to from Sipla palliative care from Pune. She was a resident of Coorg in Markera. She came to our center and she was in severe pain, hardly around 38 years or 35 years, having 2 children. And she was refusing to take any medicine. And time available was very less. Her intention is to see that if I take medicine, my life will be extended. I do not want to take. So let me go away as soon as possible. So then doctors and other people, they try to coax her to take the medicine. There is no need to suffer like this, all those things, but she was not willing for that. So then the doctor said, why don't you talk for a while? So I went to her and I said, we do not know how much time we are going to have with our children. It may be for 2 days or 2 months, or it could even be 2 years. But if you are able to manage your pain, you will be able to talk within those 2 days and 2 months. you can have a quality time with your children. But that somehow got into her head, and she started taking medicine. And she lived for nearly 3 months after that. That lady, Harini, was able to teach cooking to her children during those 3 months.
3 months.
That was an amazing experience we got. Managing this kind of emotions, it's really a challenge, but we don't know what will be triggering a good consequence. So we should keep trying for that.
Absolutely, sir. I agree with you. Any other comments or experience anybody else wants to share?
Shanti here. I want to share my experience. I have I'm a volunteer counselor with the Suktuk Helpline. One elderly person. So he has got knee problem, and surgery is advised. And at the same time, he's people say he should use walking stick also. But then he was not very. I mean, his dignity comes in. He didn't want to use that and all that. So just casually just suggested. So why not? To start with the umbrella, big olden type umbrella. So he was taken up by the idea and he was so happy. So then the next time when I talked to him, he suggested the brand which is better and which is going to use. So I was happy about that. Thank you.
Yeah, so excellent this thing, I'm very glad that you're sharing. That's what I'm saying. Dignity conserving care we are already doing. Okay, this gives just the structure and the understanding that, there are other aspects also. So we are all doing it, but we need to now do it mindfully, being aware of how we are doing it. It's very important, and this just gives the structure to it, a little bit of structure to that care that we are providing. Yeah. Anybody else would like to share? Any doubts, any questions on what the talk has been? I think we have some time, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay, so we had this patient here, one of our patients in our hospice, who was a well-read gentleman with a huge malignant fungating oral wound, who was on NG tube feeds, couldn't communicate, and abandoned by the family. Sort of the son, the wife and the daughter didn't want to have any interaction with him at all. So over a period of time, he had become very depressed. So he was referred to me primarily because of his depression. And of course, we had to start him on antidepressants because of his depression, all that. But along with that, there was a lot of issues about, I'm abandoned by everybody. I'm no longer wanted by anybody. That sense of abandonment was causing that sort of an existential distress. What is the meaning of all this? It's better that I'm dead. I want to die. So this was one person that we sort of started off on the dignity sort of a care. I just told him to look back at his life and just to write down. He could write, isn't because he was an educated gentleman, to write down on what were the things that gave him pride, what he was most proud about, what were his achievements, and what are the lessons that he had learned in this life. Okay, just 3 things I said, and I came along with the antidepressants, and he has written around 4 notebooks about what his life was, and he kept on. He had a renewed vigor for life. He stopped talking about dying, and it was his mission to write about what gave him pride. So if you see the dignity conserving repertoire, maintenance of pride, continuity of self, right? And role preservation and meaning making. All this happened in that writing. Okay, he got connected to who he was before the illness came in and took off his face, right? His face is gone, right? So he cannot even look at a mirror and imagine what he was. But writing about his achievements and what he was before connected him to who he was, right? And it also helped him to keep a message for what he had learned from life. He felt he was doing something very useful, and that shifted his few days, whatever he had left, there was a different person altogether. So small things, can make a lot of difference for the patient.
I'd like to share something.
Hello.
Hello, this is Hema.
Yes,
I'd
yes.
like to share something. I'm an occupational therapist by profession, and I see a lot of cases which are progressive in nature and have a poor prognosis. Patients like muscular dystrophy, motor neuron disease, those kind of patients. And I see some other neurological patients also, autism, ADHD, those kinds. However, with patients with muscular dystrophy and MND, as an autist, we do practice mostly almost everything that you have discussed upon today. And um, I have found that this really, really helps us with our patients. And not many people know what an occupational therapist is, but it is a very, very satisfying profession. And being able to help people uh, retain their dignity, maintain their dignity, to maintain their, maximize their independence, still, in independence and their function in life. It's a very satisfying profession and a satisfying experience. Another thing I wanted to say was, over here in my institute, I work in Neurogen Brain and Spine Institute in Mumbai, Navi Mumbai. And there was these people who had written a book, Blink to Speak. It is basically a language which you speak with your eyes by blinking. So they had come here to shoot for a very short film, which was supposed to be released in Cannes for Cannes Short Film Festival. Apparently, it won, I don't know, first or second prize. And the video is on YouTube. I have sent the link of that video on our common group. And I'm also there in that. But mainly, if anybody would like to use that book for their patients, or patients who, like you said, that the patient could only blink with one eye. So there is a ready-made language which can be learned. You don't have to go about inventing a language every time. So it is available for patients. So I have already provided the link in the WhatsApp chat.
Thank
Thanks.
you,
That's
Hema.
all.
for that.
Thanks.
Really,
Bye.
thank you. That is something that I'm learning. So I would definitely, I'll tell them to share the link with me.
Do
It's
check
something
it
that
out.
we really can incorporate in our day-to-day care of even a palliative care patients who are too ill. And
Yes.
sometimes with the GBM, glioblastoma multiforme, who are not able to communicate or move any part of their body, this blinking could be a good way to communicate. Yeah.
There are other methods also
Hmm.
for communicating. I hope you know all those, I think, but in case. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
So Sunita has put in, ma'am, most of the time we talk about patient's dignity. What about the dignity of the caregiver when the patient is more abusive and doesn't care or trust the caregiver? See, the dignity basically we talked about, because we are talking about dignity conserving care for the terminally ill. We are focusing on that. Any abusive relationship, irrespective of whether it is ill or the person is ill or is not done. But even if the patient is abusive, if it is because of any psychological issues or psychiatric disorder, then the illness has to be treated. Okay, and the patient has to be treated. But if the caregiver, the patient is plainly abusive, and then I think the caregiver requires more support, and it should not be tolerated. Abuse in any form should not be tolerated. Okay, so that is something that you will have to look at and see and find out what is causing the patient to be abusive. Is it because of some is it because of some psychiatric illness? Is it because of some interpersonal relationship issues? So that is something that you have to look at. But yes, caregiver dignity of the caregiver is as important as the dignity of the patient. Remember, we are talking about palliative care. And one of the primary definitions of palliative care is care of the patient and the family. They are the unit of care, isn't it? It's not the patient alone. It is patient and the family who are the unit of care. So your responsibility towards the caregiver is as much as towards the patient. Any other questions? Any, yeah.
No, ma'am, please continue, ma'am.
No, I was saying if you have no questions, then I think we can end the session. I think you are also about to say the same thing.
Yes, ma'am. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for that very informative session. And I thank all the participants for your active participation and sharing your experiences. Thank you so much. See you all next week. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.